Let's take a look at the Montevideo Convention. The first article in the convention states, "The state as a person of international law should possess the following qualifications. A. A permanent population. B. A defined territory. C. Government. And D. Capacity to enter into relations with the other states." Okay, as the US, I have all of those things. I am therefore a person of international law. Incidentally, the permanent population thing is interesting and does present issues for territories with nomadic communities, but that's beyond the scope of this session. Now let's introduce all of my friends who are also meeting those criteria. Here are all of the other international persons centered on their capital cities. We'll look in a moment at the composition of this list. Before that, the second article of the Montevideo Convention. The federal state shall constitute a sole person in the eyes of international law. The federal bit gives an indication as to the authorship and audience of the Montevideo Convention. It's more formally the Inter-American Convention on the Rights and Duties of States 1933, agreed between the US and 18 Central and South American states. In one sense, Montevideo is an expression of the good neighbour policy that we saw in the session on feminist approaches to IR and geopolitics, the successor to the Monroe Doctrine. But in another sense, Montevideo carries on the work of the Europeans. It puts Westphalia on a more formal footing and sets the stage for the Westphalian state to be established in places where the Europeans may never have dreamed of. 3. The political existence of the state is independent of recognition by the other states. Even before recognition, the state has the right to defend its integrity and independence. This bit is fascinating. There are two theories of state existence, constitutive and declaratory. Menon explains these. For the constitutive theory, a new state comes into being as a subject of international law only through the recognition by other states. For the declaratory theory, the state exists as a fact. As long as that's a fact, it's subject to international law, whether other states recognize it or not. We can regard the constitutive theory as a strong expression of constructivism. As Oppenheim explained in 1958, a state is and becomes an international person through recognition only and exclusively. Yet that constitutive theory goes against the more declaratory view, which taken in Montevideo Articles 3 and 6, which state, "The recognition of a state merely signifies that the state which recognizes it accepts that the personality of the other with all the rights and duties determined by international law. Recognition is unconditional and irrevocable." So, if another state recognizes me as the US, that doesn't call me into existence. I existed already. It just means that the other state has acknowledged my personality. But once the other state has acknowledged it, there's no going back, even if you've only given a passing reference rather than a formal statement, as is seen in Article 7. The recognition of a state may be express or tacit. The latter results from any act which implies the intention of recognizing the new state. Some of the states I've presented here are not recognized by the United States, but that's because the list I'm drawing on is not from a state, but from fellow political scientists, namely the Correlates of War Project, which is closely related to the list of states created by Christian Gleditch and Michael Ward. Now let's play around with this a little. Article 4 of the Convention says that states are juridically equal, enjoy the same rights, and have equal capacity in their exercise. Clearly, states are not equal. That's why the article goes on to say, "The rights of each one do not depend upon the power which it possesses to assure its exercise, but upon the simple fact of its existence as a person under international law." So all of my friends here are juridically equal, or put another way, they have sovereign equality, but they do have different levels of power. You can have all the sovereignty you like, but without power, that sovereignty means nothing. One big indicator of the power of a state is its population. Let's get rid of all of the juridically equal states and replace them with states adjusted for population size. As we see, China and India are the states with the largest populations. At over 2.7 billion people between them, that's over a third of the world's population living in either China or India. Next comes me, the US, with 1 billion less people than either China or India. After the US are Indonesia, Pakistan, Brazil, and so on. Let me give a little explanation of what I've done here. I'm still centering on capital city, but I've resized for population. As some populations are bigger than others, I've put the bigger ones toward the back and the smaller toward the front. Otherwise you wouldn't be able to see the smaller ones. Next, let's try surface area. Russia is the clear giant this time, followed by Canada, and interestingly again, the US in third place. China comes next, and there's actually little to separate Canada, the US and China in surface area. Okay, so if we've got surface area and we've got population, then we can easily do population density. And for population density, I'm going to disappear. Now that's partly due to the fact that Monaco is such an outlier. Monaco is our tiniest state at just 2 square kilometres, and while its population of about 39,000 is comparable to that of a town or village, it does give us our highest population density. But even if we remove Monaco as an outlier, there are still many more places with much higher population densities than the US, such as Singapore, keeping me invisible and pushing me to number 145 on the list. As such, it makes sense to use a logarithmic scale. So here's the natural log of population density. Taking the log, you can actually see me now, although Canada and the Bahamas are obscuring me a bit. Okay, so I like a bit of attention. Let's do GDP. And wow, I really am the big kid on the block for this one. Shame you can't see my head, but there we are. But while the Keynesian notion of GDP as a measure of private consumption, investment and government spending, factoring in foreign trade, may have been useful in the Second World War, it's not very useful now. Even if I control for population with GDP per capita, as I'm doing now, fundamentally what I'm crudely measuring is production, not something more interesting such as state capacity or welfare. One very useful measure of a state's ability to look after its citizens is infant mortality rate. Sadly, this is where African states become the most prevalent. The Central African Republic, Sierra Leone and Nigeria are the top 3, with African states having the 15 highest infant mortality rates in the world. There are lots of reasons why you shouldn't present data or maps in this way. 2 books which give excellent overviews of these reasons are Darrell Huff's How to Lie with Statistics and Marc Monmonier's How to Lie with Maps. But I don't want to get into that today. We'll look at those in later sessions. For today, I want to say, be very, very careful when regarding a state as a person, as you're engaging in an act of constructivism. And that's without even engaging with the notions of anthropomorphism or gendering, which are also beyond the scope of this session.